Interviews. Unless you are incredibly lucky in your life, we all have to go through interviews. And most of us absolutely hate interviews. They are terrifying. They bring out the worst in people, and they can bring out the weird side of people as well. And we've all been there. We try to act a certain way in interviews, and we try to be a certain person, and most of the time we're not even that person, but we pretend to in the hope of securing some sort of job. It can bring out the weirdest in all of us from both sides. So I want to share with you today 5 stories in which I have been both on the receiving end and giving the interviews, and just weird stuff has happened or has happened as a consequence of us hiring the wrong person. So here are my 5 disaster interviews. So just to give you a little bit of background in all of this, I have been through so many jobs. I've done every single kind of job when it comes to IT, and as a result, I've also had a lot of interviews. I've done a lot of interviews. Whilst I've done a lot of interviews, I've also given a lot of interviews in my career. So, disaster interview number 1, and this was an interview that I was giving alongside some of my colleagues. So this guy rolls up to the interview, and the interview is for a developer position, so someone who writes code to make applications do things. And he came off really good. He started really well, and he could talk, right? This guy clearly knew the technology. He could talk. He was going for everything. He knew all the right things to say. He knew all the right answers, which was incredible. And we were like, oh, okay, this is amazing. And at this time, we weren't asking anything like deeply technical. It was purely surface questions about technology. And when we started to ask him technical questions, halfway through, he just drops on us, "I don't code." What? I'm sorry, he got that far. He got halfway through the interview being able to successfully answer all these questions, and then all of a sudden we ask him a technical question and he just says, "I can't code." It was madness, right? And what I don't understand is, how can you know that much about technology but then not know how to code? How can you know that much about the individual software libraries that go into an application, and there can be hundreds, and then just not know how to code? And then in the end he told us, "Oh, I just tell other people what to do." Suffice to say, we ended that call pretty quickly. This sort of person is what I call a professional and I hate saying that, but they exist, and it still baffles me today how these people can exist, but they do. And clearly this guy, he wasn't a young guy, so he must know how to make a living off this. He must know that he just needs to research key terms, key software libraries, keywords, and he will be able to pass an interview. But unfortunately for this guy, when we started asking technical questions, he was done. And that was the end of that guy. And I think he knew the moment we asked him that question, his face just dropped and we all went silent on the interview, and it was just a state of like weirdness on this call, and we were all just quiet, and it was just like, yeah, you're done, mate, see you later. The next interview number 2, that was an absolute disaster. So again, I and my colleagues were giving this interview. It's definitely up there with one of my weirdest, strangest interviews. So as usual, we start the interview. Now, when we do our interviews, we turn our cameras on. Our cameras being turned on allows the person to be comfortable, allows them to see us, and we can see them. But in this particular interview, Whereas 95% of people will be happy to turn their cameras on, this person would not turn their camera on. And their CV looks pretty good. And we were like, right, okay, well, let's just give this guy a chance. And we asked him, can you please turn your camera on? But he just sort of went quiet and he wouldn't say anything. So we asked again, could you please turn your camera on so we can see you? And a message popped up in our Google Meets call saying, can you give me a minute, please? I'm just going to turn my camera on. And we're like, okay, no problem. That's fine. Let him turn his camera on. We'll give you a minute. But 5 minutes passed and there was no camera. And after about 5 minutes, every couple of minutes, he would just keep saying, hold on, please. Please hold on. I'm having problems with my camera. Then he started like dropping off the call and rejoining the call, and dropping off the call and rejoining the call. This happened about like, I don't know, 2-3 times. It was very weird. And every time he kept saying, please hold on, I'm having technical problems. You cannot be having that much technical issues with a camera that is supposed to be, in this day and age, built in to your laptop, right? This is not a thing. This is not a thing that happens. So this was getting really weird. Now, 15 minutes had passed and finally the camera comes on and we're just like, finally, thanks. I've got work to do as well, you know? So thanks for attending the interview. And I'm not joking. I can only describe this as just some kid in some semi-formal clothes appeared on the camera, and he was just a kid. It was like they went on the street and they grabbed someone and pulled him in and just put him in a shirt, sat him in front of a laptop and turned the camera on. And this kid was just sat there. He was just like he had no idea what he was doing there or why he was there. So he started the interview, right? And I didn't think too much more of it. And I just started asking the question. I was like, okay, hi. Told him a little bit about ourselves, who we are, what we do, as you do in a polite interview. And I stated that we're going to go from top to bottom through his CV, and we're just going to veer off and talk about technical subjects, blah, 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 just to gauge their understanding and technical understanding of the role. And every question I asked this kid, every answer he gave, he would just sit there and just say, I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, let's move on to the next part of your CV. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Every single thing I asked this person, he just went, I don't know. After about 2 minutes of him saying, I don't know, which, by the way, is a long time for someone to keep saying, I don't know, right? I eventually just said to him, this is your CV though. You've listed these projects as things that you've done. What do you mean? How do you not know what you've done? And this time he said, oh, I've forgotten. And I was just like, you've forgotten? This was just last year. How have you forgotten? And he just kept saying, I'm sorry, sir, I've forgotten. And at this point, I knew something was really wrong. And also, I was trying so hard. I was trying so hard not to laugh. Do you know how hard it is not to laugh in an interview when you're in a situation like that? It is really difficult. And I do this thing where I cover my mouth like this, and if I'm laughing, suffice to say, we cut that interview there and we didn't hear from that person again. So disaster interview number 3. Now this is a short one, but it highlights how some people really don't think about what they're saying before they bail out altogether, right? And they know they've shot themselves in the foot. So as always, we're recruiting for a development position, and we are recruiting for programmers, people who know code. Now, this guy joined the call full of energy, really optimistic, and we love that because it's always a great first impression and we can feed off it, and, you know, we can dive into questions and we can generally have a better conversation if someone is very upbeat and optimistic. So that's how the interview started. But again, like the last interview that I talked about with the camera not being turned on, This guy would not turn his camera on. He just started talking. At this point, we've now learned our lesson about cameras. What we've learned is if the camera doesn't turn on, it's generally not the person that you thought it might be. So now we ask, can you please turn the camera on? And the guy said, oh, sorry, I'm on a train. I was like, okay, well, that's dedicated. Most people wouldn't do an interview whilst on the train. So he said, give me 2 minutes. Fine, no problem. This is starting to sound like last time, but sure, 2 minutes. So he came back and he said, oh, let me just get my camera out of my bag. Sorry. Who is traveling on a train and has a web camera in their bag? I'm sorry, this isn't 1995, right? Where everyone had web cameras. Web cameras are built into your laptop or your phone. So you're telling me that you do not have a phone or a laptop with you right now that has a camera on it whilst you're on a train. So you're about to go into your bag and get your camera out and connect it to whatever device you're using and then proceed with the interview? No. And I think at that point he knew what he'd done and he had shot himself in the foot, and he actually just cut the call. He knew what he'd done and was out of there. And to be fair, he'd saved us our time as well. And of course, we never heard from him again. Interview number 4. Now this one is a bit embarrassing because this was an interview that I and my colleagues gave, and he got through. Now, let me explain what I mean when I say he got through. This guy was a fairly young guy, clearly technically minded. He is technically minded. He is wired that way. And there's no other way to say this. He smashed the interview. He got through all the questions, talked in detail about what things did and how they worked. And we were like, okay, this guy's a great junior developer, let's get him on board and let's get him rocking and rolling. And of course, anyone that we hire, we support fully as a team. That is our culture within the company that I work for. But something wasn't quite right. Now, I manage a team of several developers, and the culture of the team is, as previously mentioned, to help each other. So this guy had joined the company, he'd smashed the interview and he'd joined the company. He knew how to talk the talk. He was a great talker, and that's how he got this far in the first place. And like the first interview I talked about, where the guy couldn't actually code, this was one of them, but he had gone one step further and effectively was a corporate imposter. This is what I call these people. They are imposters within your corporation who shouldn't be there and are being paid. 1 month goes by and he's writing code. Everything's going fine. But I started to notice something. This code that I was starting to review from that guy who got through the interview process and I called a corporate imposter, I started to notice that his code looked like other people's code. Now, for those of you who don't quite understand what I'm trying to say here, imagine you're a publisher and everyone writes everything by hand. So you know their handwriting. Everyone's got a signature style. Everyone has a specific handwriting that is unique to them. But let's say you know their handwriting. You've got a team and you know what each of them write like, and you know their handwriting. Imagine a new writer comes on board and gives you their first, paper or something like that, something that they've written, but it's the handwriting of the team that you already know. I hope that makes sense to you, because that would mean that the person who's just joined has got everyone else to do their work. And it was really weird. I would be reading this guy's code and every block of it was someone else's code that I already know how these developers code. What this guy had done is effectively ask everyone to do pieces of his work, his task, whatever that might have been, and he put it together and passed it off as his own. Anyway, I got my detective hat on and I started asking questions around the team, and slowly but surely, one by one, all my team members started to tell me that they have been doing this guy's work, and they were frustrated and annoyed, but no one came forward and told me. Anyway, suffice to say, he didn't last much longer and we cut him straight away from the business. This is a great example of how some people are just so good at talking and they know what to say at the right time. Even with the strictest of checks, they can still get through. But eventually, these people will always be caught out. And this is what happened in this scenario. The long story short is we got on a call with him, gave him an absolute bollocking and sent him on his way. What's really weird is I still hear from this guy like now and then, and he constantly like thanks me for stuff. And I'm like, mate, I don't think you're in a position to thank me for anything. It's a bit weird, but that is the nature of the game. Disaster interview number 5, the last one. This was an interview that I went to when I was a much younger developer. This was horrific. I mean, I still remember it today because it was just so weird. So this company was some sort of set-top box management company that managed the software on set-top boxes, and I can't remember what set-top box it was, but it was some sort of digital TV service, and it wasn't any of the big ones as well. I think it was just some sort of small-time set-top box company. But I attended this interview, and the guy that I was interviewing with, I can only describe the whole experience as going on a date with a narcissist, and that's literally what it was. For 20 minutes the guy sat there and he just talked about himself. It was just so bizarre. I was just like, mate, are you going to let me say anything? Are you going to ask me anything? He just sat there for 20 minutes talking about himself, and at one point I thought to myself, right, I better say something here, right? I better try and get involved in this conversation. This guy was just like a machine gun motor mouth. He was just like, but with his mouth, and it was just so weird. I'm just thinking about the atmosphere in the room. It was so bizarre. I can't stress this enough, but he wouldn't let me say anything. We've all been there, where we've been in a situation where there's someone that talks too much, but this guy just wouldn't stop. It was like a verbal wall of verbal diarrhea, if you can imagine such a thing. That is literally what it was, and I could not get through it. So I saw this opportunity to actually say something. I said, oh, but have you heard of like this database, and have you seen how they do this thing? And he stopped and he just looked at me. He just stared at me like I'd broken his state of mind and thinking, and the way he looked at me was like he didn't know where he was, and he didn't know who I was and why I was there. And he just stopped and he looked at me like, and he was looking around me, which was weird. And as you can imagine, I was becoming very, very uncomfortable at this moment in time. I even looked out the window. There was a window that was, I don't know, like 5 feet from me to my right hand side. I'm not joking. The thought crossed my mind to jump out the window. And this building was like, this was on the 3rd floor, so it wasn't even a safe jump that I could have like landed safely. I was going to hurt myself, but I considered jumping out the window just to escape this particular interview, which was an absolute disaster. So just coming back to when I actually tried to say something, he looked at me in a really weird way and he just went, no, don't worry about that. And he just carried on. He just carried on talking about stuff and himself that was nothing to do with the interview whatsoever. And when I think back at that, situation, I realize that some people are just not good with people. Some people don't know how to interact. Some people don't know how to have a proper conversation. And this guy was a turbo nerd for sure. And he probably didn't know what to do in that situation or scenario. So he was probably just doing what he thought was right. But clearly, in hindsight, with my experience now, he didn't know what he was doing. And in order to master, he just would talk and talk and talk in order to make him look better than he actually is. So that is my 5th interview, and I pray that you never have to deal with a situation like that, because it is weird. So what I really want to know is, have you had a disaster interview? Whether it's giving the interview or being interviewed, I would love to know, because it is always entertaining and it will also help people who just want to know what to expect of interviews. So please comment down below. Let's talk about this, because I'm sure it's going to be absolutely hilarious. And please like and subscribe to this channel, and let's keep this content going, because I've got so much I want to tell you guys. So thanks, have a great day. This is Keo from Constant, and I'll see you on the next video.